So the title of my talk is going to be The Philosophical Foundation of Mimetic Theory and Cognitive Science, in parentheses, including, of course, artificial intelligence. It was in the mid-1970s that I discovered, approximately at the same time, cognitive science and mimetic theory. Being a philosopher with a scientific background, I immediately brought them together and tried to conceptualize mimetic theory in terms of cognitive science. In a sense, haven't stopped doing that in the last 45 years. That is why I feel fully at home with the goals pursued by the organizers of this conference and Sandy Goodhart in particular. I do not believe it is feasible or even desirable to operate a rapprochement between the two disciplines at a global level. Only a piecemeal approach makes sense in my mind. So I will here present 4 short case studies which cover the whole period from the beginnings in cybernetics to today's artificial intelligence. In order to better situate these studies within a broader frame, I propose the following diagram. To comment it would require more time than available for my whole presentation. So I will just say a few words about it. Sorry, it's here. Okay, I hope it's visible, legible. Who can see this? Sorry, I have parasitic information that comes on my screen. Can I get rid of it? Yes, okay. So here it is. It is essential to distinguish, and I'm not sure this is always being done, between 2 kinds of artificial intelligence, which I call here schematically AI1 and AI2. The first to bear this name was launched by, the first to bear this name, you see this on the right, AI1, was launched by economist Herbert Simon and computer scientist Alan Turing at the Dartmouth conference in 1956. It was based on the premise that thinking is computing, this computation bearing on sentences of a, quote in quotes, language of thought implementable in a digital computer. It turns out that this AI1 was progressively substituted from the 1980s onward by an AI2, which to some extent was a return to a fundamental result obtained before even AI1 existed, obtained by cybernetics in 1943. Neurophysiologist Warren McCulloch from the MIT and mathematician Walter Pitts had constructed a mathematical model of a network of elementary calculators that they call neurons, and they explored its properties. The capacity to think was one of these properties. Thinking was not in their model situated at the elementary level, as was the case in AI1, but it emerged at the collective level from the interactions between the neurons. This model was heavily criticized by the supporters of AI1. And I must remind you that the origin of the word artificial intelligence, this phrase was proposed by Herbert Simon and Alan Turing to better distinguish themselves from cybernetics. So there is a mimetic rivalry at the source of the name, at least, artificial intelligence. And there was an unfortunate implementation of AI1, of the AI2, called the perception in 1957, as you can see on the diagram. However, the emergence of the second order cybernetics. So in the same way that you have two AIs, you have two kinds of cybernetics. The second order cybernetics under the guidance of cybernetician Heinz von Förster, who I must say was my introducer to cognitive science, a great, great friend of mine, late, who died some 10 years, well, in 2002. Well, that's more than what I thought. And the emergence of this second order cybernetics, along with the emergence of the theory of complex self-organizing systems that it helped develop in cooperation and rivalry with similar efforts in the physical and chemical sciences, all that enabled the neural network model to come to a second life under different names: formal neurons, deep learning, big data, and the like. Together, these elements constitute AI2, as you can see on the diagram. This network of influences wouldn't have been possible without its stem, that is, the boxes containing the names of Kurt Gödel and Alan Turing. The former revolutionized logic by showing that reasoning about arithmetic and arithmetic are one and the same, insofar as it is possible to code in a one-to-one fashion propositions about integers. For instance, 7 is a prime number, and this coding by the means of integers themselves. The latter, Alan Turing, demonstrated that some mechanism can self-transcend in as much as they generate an ensemble of outputs that cannot be defined mechanistically. Later, John von Neumann, whose name you see at the middle of the diagram, one of the greatest mathematicians of the 20th century and probably of all times, John von Neumann was credited along with Alan Turing in England and John von Neumann at the MIT in particular, with having invented the digital computer. John von Neumann would use this logical possibility determined by Alan Turing to define complexity. Is complex a mechanism that is capable of generating more complex than itself? The gate was open for the theories of complex self-organizing systems to thrive, and by way of consequence for AI2 to emerge. I won't say any more. Well, it would require 3 sessions or 3 hours to develop, to flesh out these, the information in this diagram. Oh, let me, some small auto-publicity. Many of these ideas that I'm going to present today are in this book, which Sandy mentioned, On the Origin of Cognitive Science. So these are the 4 case studies I'm going to propose to your attention. Fascination with models, the complexity from noise principle and the morphogenetic power of mimesis, simulation versus imitation, and love and big data, if time permits, of course. So I start with fascination with models. And it's going to be a reflection on the person of Herbert Simon, who is generally considered to be the founder of artificial intelligence. As I said before, it's artificial intelligence in its second stage, in its first stage, sorry. Herbert Simon was an economist, and he won the Nobel Prize in economics for his work on what he called bounded rationality. He was a very strange guy. He was fascinated with models, and the complete list of his works include a number of titles conceived on the same model, which are models of man, models of discovery, models of thought, models of bounded rationality, etc., including the title of his autobiography, Models of My Life. His favorite model, that's not going to surprise you, appears to be the digital computer. Like all scholars of his stature, Simon traveled widely, which is no longer the case. Today, under the current pandemic, of course. He claims, however, to have learned nothing from his travels abroad that he had not already learned more quickly, more easily, and less expensively from the collections of any number of good libraries in the US. That is his travel theory. You learn nothing from your travels abroad that you have not already learned, etc., etc., etc. The first time Simon and his wife visited Europe in 1965, they arranged their itinerary so that they would see nothing that they did not already know through books or paintings. The 2 weeks they passed in France were a sort of pilgrimage devoted to Marcel Proust and Paul Cézanne. At Sainte-Victoire and they went to the exact spots where Cézanne had planted his easel. Quote, "We learned nothing new, we had already seen the paintings." Citing Oscar Wilde, where were the fogs of London before Turner painted them? Simon concludes, nature in its fashion imitates art. And he also cites the great Argentinian writer Jorge Luis Borges, for whom history is only a copy of literature. I could add that COVID-19 has given substance to this philosophy. Today, you cannot visit the Louvre physically, but you can do it online. It is legitimate to trace back this fascination with models to the great Italian philosopher Giambattista Vico at the beginning of the 18th century. Vico characterized the new science that was emerging in his time by the Latin phrase verum et factum convertitur, which means the true and the made are convertible. This means that we can have rational knowledge only about that of which we are the cause, about what we ourselves have produced. In science, you can know only in making, or rather in remaking, making over, if you like. That is why science as an activity consists essentially in constructing models, and especially mathematical models. Science, when you think of it, is the sole human activity, if I'm not mistaken, where the word model has a sense opposite to the one given it in everyday speech. Normally, we speak of a model, especially the Girardians, as something one imitates or that deserves to be imitated. But a scientific model is an imitation from the start. It bears the same type of relation to reality as what we may call a reduced model, a toy model, if you like. The kind of relation that a reduced model does to its object, being the most readily manipulable reproduction of it. This inversion of meaning is striking and worth pondering, especially from the vantage point of mimetic theory. However, in spite of this inversion, the copy, that is the model, is the model in the ordinary sense and not only in the scientific sense. And that's a problem of science today. It is the copy that science admires and is fascinated with, the copy that is its own creation, model, mathematical model. A model is so much purer, so much more readily mastered than the world of phenomena, that there is a risk that the model, mathematical model in particular, may become the exclusive object of the scientist's attention. Theories, indeed, whole disciplines can be organized around the study of a model's properties. Witness economics. It's not by chance that Herbert Simon was an economist. Witness economics, which keeps exploring the resources of model of general economic equilibrium bequeathed to it by the French economist Léon Walras. A last word about the prehistory of artificial intelligence in the Mackelor-Pitts neural network model. of Warren McCulloch, who was at the beginning, as I said, a neurophysiologist. His colleague at the MIT, the neurophysiologist Jerome Ledvin, could say in 1984 the following: he was dedicated to knowing how the brain works in the way that the creator of any machine knows its workings. The key to such knowledge is not to analyze observation, but to create a model and then to compare it with observation by mapping. But the poiesis must come first, and McCulloch would rather have failed in trying to create a brain than to have succeeded in describing an existing one more fully. And of course, that is how neurophysiology gave way to artificial intelligence. End of my first case study. To the complexity from noise principle and the morphogenetic power of mimesis. In the 1950s, cyberneticians were famous for designing machines that mimicked the behavior of animals. At times called tortoises, these primitive autonomous robots were not meant to accomplish any specific task, but to illustrate concepts and theories. Neurophysiologist William Gray Walter had one day a brilliant idea. He designed two such tortoises in such a way that each one would imitate the other's movements. To his surprise, the two animals improvised a kind of dance that possessed a certain coherence and even harmony. Think of another analogy. Two absent-minded professors. I can show you I'm one of them, and Andrew being, let's say, the second. Two absent-minded professors going together to attain the same event. Neither of them knows the venue. Each one believes the other knows. A trajectory emerges endowed with some stability from the fact that each partner follows in the other footsteps. The mimeticians present at this conference, that is everyone, understand, will have recognized the pattern that René Girard called double mediation. I have long maintained, some of my friends here, well, here in this abstract space that we are sharing, have long maintained that it was a mistake to ground mimetic theory on the so-called mimetic triangle for two reasons. One is obvious. If mimesis is universal, the mediator's desire, everyone knows this schema, the mediator's desire itself imitates the desire of someone else. Well, so the triangle is not complete here. There is something missing, of course, and if you complicate it, you lose the triangular form. And the simplest and most complex case is when the subject and the mediator imitate each other. And that's exactly what René called double mediation. And the paradigmatic example being in things, in English it's desire, deceit and the novel, the beginning of Stendhal's novel, the black and the rouge and the noir, the red and black, with the couple Valno and de Renal. The second reason is that, as I'm going to show, of all mimetic patterns, it is double mediation that explains the incredible morphogenetic power of mimesis, as we're going to see. And this is where cognitive science brings something essential here. Back to cybernetics, precisely, and its transition to the theory of self-organizing complex systems. That is, if you remember, the matrix of AI in its second version. A number of authors, okay, this is the object of desire doesn't exist desire, it is a creation of double mediation. Okay, suppose that everyone is quite familiar with this concept, fundamental concept. Okay, from cybernetics to the theory of self-organizing complex systems and AI in its second version. So 3 people here I want to single out. Heinz von Förster, well, the 3 of them are or were, 2 of them are dead, unfortunately. Heinz von Förster, who came from Austria and started the so-called second cybernetics. Henri Atlan, a Franco-Israeli biophysicist who developed the theory of self-organizing systems. He's alive. He's, as you see, he's 90 years old this year. And the great Francisco Varela, Chilean neurophysiologist who came to Paris to study with us and died of autoimmune disease, hepatitis C, and etc., too young, as you can see. Well, a number of authors like these 3 came up in the 1970s with a principle which they dubbed complexity from noise. Thanks to their work, the transformation of chance in the jargon of information theory is called noise. The transformation of chance into complexity. And they showed that this transformation has proved to be a major element in the understanding of what makes a system self-organized. It can be best illustrated as follows, via a thought experiment dubbed the Polias-Urn scheme after the name of Hungarian-born Stanford professor of mathematics, George Polya, who was the professor, among others, of John von Neumann. An urn contains, well, this is not an urn, this is a box or a voting box, so it's not the student of mine who drew this. Imagine that it's an urn, something in which it is easy to put things and to take them out. An urn contains one white ball and one black ball. One ball is drawn randomly from the urn and its color observed. It is then placed back in the urn, but together with another ball of the same color. And you see here that we have a stock of infinite number of white balls and black balls. Hence, the number of balls in the urn increases by 1 every time. This very simple system can be said to have a memory, and its dynamic is self-reinforcing. Every draw increases the chances of pulling out a ball of the same color. For instance, if you have a white and a black at the beginning, suppose you pull out the white, then you put it back into the urn, and then you add a white ball, which of course increases the chances of drawing a white ball at the next stage. This is how it works. And this is, note that this is exactly what occurs in what René called double mediation. Think of the parable of the 2 absent-minded professors. Any random swerve by one of the 2 tortoises is amplified by the imitation of the other's imitation to the square. The question is, how does the proportion of white balls evolve, let's say white, evolve over time? If we had time, if we were in normal setting, etc., I would ask you to guess, but we cannot do that now. It is very easy actually to simulate the evolution of this evolution with a simple calculators coupled with a generator of random numbers. So let's suppose we realize the experiment and we observe with interest that the system seems to have the same kind of dynamics as many stochastic systems. A series of oscillations dampen out and converge toward a certain value. The surprise is that this value is not 50%, 0.5, in which case half the balls in the urn would be white. Why is it a surprise? Because the setting is perfectly symmetrical. The observed breach of symmetry seems to come from nowhere. No rational explanation seems capable of accounting for it. However, an even stronger surprise is that every time the experiment is carried out, again, the same phenomenology obtains, but the value towards the dynamics, but the value towards which the dynamics converges is different each time. It is entirely contingent on the experiment in question. Example, okay, this is the horizontal axis is the time. So we've done this 10 million times, and we get this first experiment, okay, which the convergence is towards a value that is not 50%, that is, let's say, 75%. Then we do it again, and we get, hey, please, yeah. And we get something like 0.20 or something. We do it again, and we get something close to 50%. We do it again, etc. Each time, there is a new value that towards which the dynamics converges. The dynamics, each time the dynamics seems to be converging towards a pre-existing value, but the value is generated by the very dynamics. From within, it is impossible to realize that the pre-existing end does not guide the evolution. It is as if the evolution were finalized, were oriented by an end. But from without, that is, if we are able to pull ourselves up by our own bootstraps and contemplate from there the set of all possible trajectories, our specific world appears in all its contingent singularity to be just one among a manifold of possibilities. This is a case of complexity from noise. Something complex, something radical new, novel emerges from what? From disorder, from noise. Chance here brings about a form of necessity that appears as such only retrospectively, backward necessity, if you like. The relationship between the dynamics, yeah, okay, these are the four cases. The relationship between dynamics and its asymptotic behavior, called in the jargon of mathematical theory of dynamical systems an attractor, this relationship takes on the form of a loop that is the signature feature of self-organizing systems. That is a loop between an emerging level, the attractor, the apparent finality, and its conditions of production, the dynamics. The dynamics converges towards an attractor that is generated by itself. The word to describe this is very common now in science and mathematics. It's said, evolution is said to be path dependent. I've been able to show, not only me, but my friends and me, my friends and I, to show that all the mimetic and sacrificial figures that mimetic theory has put forward or brought out, double mediation, pseudo-narcissism, pseudo-masochism, the pattern of the stranger, Camus' l'étranger, the scapegoating mechanism, are particular instances of this bootstrapping scheme. Let me stress that this work, carried out in common with a number of eminent scholars, such as French economist André Orléans, dates back to the 1980s. So it shouldn't sound as being new to most mimeticians. At least I hope so. But the only thing I want to stress here is the important role that fundamental concepts derived from cognitive science and the fledgling artificial intelligence played a fundamental role in the formalization of René Girard's fundamental ideas. So how much time do I have, by the way? Nobody there to answer? Huh?
You have until almost 5 of 11. So you have until 11.
Sorry, I'm in Paris, as you know. So 5 to 5 to 5 here. 5 to 5. you had to add 6 hours. Huh? I'm 6 hours ahead of you. So 5 to 11. 5
to 11 is 5 to 5. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. More time than I need. Simulation versus imitation. The model par excellence that gave the initial impetus to cybernetics and later artificial intelligence in its first stage, at least, was the Turing machine. We have already talked a lot about the Turing machine. This particular machine was anything but a material robot. It was a mathematical ideality which purported to simulate any mechanical process, and therefore, thanks to a giant step akin to an act of faith, was capable of simulating the functioning of the human mind. This idea, named the Turing thesis, was something like this: all that the human mind can accomplish and that can be described precisely without ambiguity in a finite number of words can be carried out by a readily programmed computer. As you all know now, this is the end of the conference, almost. In 1950, Alan Turing published in Mind an article entitled Computing Machinery and Intelligence, in which he presented his famous imitation game. That's the title of a movie that made this with, what's his name? Cumberbatch in the role of Turing. Yeah. The goal was to propose an experimental apparatus to test whether a sufficiently well-programmed machine is able to pass for a human being from the point of view of a human observer who interacts with it. So the game is played with 3 players. 3 players, a machine, you see it's a computer here, a green computer, a human being behind the screen, and a human interrogator below the screen, on the other side of the screen, rather, who neither sees nor hears the first 2. And he must determine who is who by conversing with them by means, for example, of a teleprinter at the top. The machine has a strategy to mislead the interrogator by posing as a human being, and the human being tries to affirm his identity as a human being, of course. And the machine would be deemed to have sufficiently well simulated the behavior of a human being if the interrogator proves incapable of deciding which is which. In English, the verb to simulate now, after Turing, has a double meaning. The new meaning, the one Turing contributed to, refers to a computer simulation. To simulate in this sense is to know, because the knowledge of an object or phenomenon consists of producing a model of it, we've understood that, and of operating on it according to predetermined rules. In the background, however, to simulate retains its originary sense, namely to pretend, to pass for what one is not. In contrast, said it in parentheses, with to dissimulate, where we hide what we are. Turing has done much to ensure that these 2 meanings of simulate become only one. To know within a culture which is from now on modeled by the cognitive and communication sciences, to know is to simulate the act of knowledge. To think is to simulate the process of thought. In a historical irony, it seems that the French have grasped the meaning of Turing's imitation game much better than the Americans. Take the case of the Berkeley philosopher John Searle and the thought experiment he devised in order to better refute Turing. He called it the Chinese rule. Let's imagine, he said, that I, Searle, or Jean-Pierre, who understand no Chinese, I'm locked in a room with a reservoir of Chinese characters and a program written in my native language, English or French, that allows me to manipulate the characters which are identified by their form alone. From outside the room, they ask me questions in the form of sequences of characters. Thanks to instructions of my program, I furnish answers in the form of other sequences, which I pass to the outside. This is an input-output system, and it operates the way it operates is, according to Searle, is indistinguishable from a Chinese man with an understanding of what he does and who responds to questions asked of him. I said, according to Searle, I made a big mistake. According to the computer scientists, or the cyberneticians, or the artificial intelligence people. Searle objects to that. However, it is clear, at least for Searle, that neither I nor the system constituted of the room can claim to have thought what we were doing thinking. The manipulation of symbols according to predetermined rules, what we call a program, will be able at most to simulate the production and communication of meaning, but it will never be able to make these things real, that is, to realize them. Fundamental distinction, according to Searle, between simulating and making something real. I need water. It would be absurd, so Searle affirms, to undertake, that's an example, his favorite example as a good Californian. It would be absurd to undertake to digest pizza by running a computer program which would simulate the biochemical processes of the stomach of someone who actually digests pizza. I think I have a representation of this. Okay. How is it that we do not see, he demands, that it is equally absurd to pretend to replicate the neurobiological functioning of the mind by running a computer program which simulates or models its operation? There is a fundamental distinction between model and reality. Well, is that certain? That's a question I want to put. Searle believes he has refuted Turing. In reality, I think he understood nothing of Turing's philosophy. Why? Because the distinction Searle finds obvious between simulation and realization or duplication falls away if the act or state to be replicated is itself already a simulation. That's my point. After Turing's suicide, principally it was a suicide, it's not absolutely certain, a philosophical school developed in France that its main promoter, Jacques Derrida, called, as you all know, deconstruction. More than once, Derrida and Searle clashed, and they had a long conversation. A favorite example of Derrida's was not the digestion of a pizza, but rather the value of money. Let's start with the fact that money in the form of paper money is a pure sign, without intrinsic value and guaranteed by a non-existent treasury. The treasury exists possibly in Fort Knox, but it's empty. We can conclude from this, according to Derrida, that money is always already counterfeit. The fact that it enters into commercial transactions results purely from the existence of a potentially infinite chain of shared credulities. If money really possesses a positive value, if you can buy things with money, it is because everyone believes falsely that money has a positive value. money really has a positive value because everyone believes falsely that it has a positive value. There is, according to Derrida, no essential difference between a dollar bill from the presses of the FRB, Federal Reserve Board, and a simulated dollar, that is to say, a counterfeit dollar. This latter dollar itself also, neither more nor less than the dollar being supposedly legal tender, enters into commercial exchange as long as we believe it to have the value of a dollar. That is, as long as we do not doubt it as a fake. At the forefront of Derrida's thinking was the linguistic side. In an echo of Searle's Chinese room, he said somewhere that, quote, the only way to fake being a Chinese speaker when speaking to a Chinese citizen is to address that person in Chinese. Therefore, in this order of utterance, simulation is simulation of simulation. In order to pretend, I really do. Therefore, I just pretended to pretend, unquote. Some might say that this is foggy, blah, blah. I think there is something very serious about it. And it's Girard who showed that it was very serious. It is difficult, almost impossible, to write about artificial intelligence without any reference to mathematical concepts. A very important concept in this domain is the concept of the fixed point of an operator. Let me very briefly and simply take an example that was proposed actually by Heinz von Förster. Consider the first sentence. This sentence has 20 letters. You count the number of letters and you find 28 letters. If it was this sentence has 10 letters, this sentence would have a certain number of letters. So the notion of fixed point is you try to find a number such as this sentence says of itself the truth. For instance, it works in English with 31. This sentence has 31 letters, has 31 letters, which you can present as a self-referential assertion. This sentence has 31 letters. This is the concept of the fixed point. So it's a self-referential property of a certain operator. So this sentence in English, this sentence has 31 letters, but you can show that there is another fixed point, 33, and you can check, it's very easy. Now, if I were, which is my case, speaking or writing in French, I would find that cette phrase a 28 lettres, it works with 28. 28, of course, is not neither 31 nor 33. So it depends on the language, of course. Okay, this is a fixed point. Okay, consider the set of fixed points of the simulation operator, taking simulation in the double meaning that conflates modeling and make-believe. This operator is designed to bear on objects, processes, or states. And the problem consists of exploring the ensemble of fixed points of this operator, that is to say the object X, such that X is equivalent to simulation of X. And if that is the case, if you substitute for the X in the parentheses, simulation of X, you get simulation of X, etc., etc., etc. We can concede to Searle that the digestion of pizza does not belong here. But the philosophical foundations of artificial intelligence involve considering that all mental phenomena, to think, to know, to understand, to speak a language, etc., are fixed points of the operator of simulation. The thing in itself is indistinguishable from its simulation. Therefore, it is indistinguishable from the simulation of its simulation. And the value of money, as we saw, belongs in that list. The French again spotted this structure in many areas. In his novel entitled Les Faux Monnaires, which literally means the counterfeiters. Well, no, it doesn't mean that. But the title was translated as the faux monnaie, the counterfeiters, sorry. which is more explicit. In this novel, which nobody reads any longer, unfortunately, André Gide applied this structure in one stroke to money, literature, and love. For him, in this novel, and for many other authors, and French authors in particular, specialists of love, there may be no dividing line between loving, believing that one loves, and pretending to love. You find this not only in Gide, but in the long tradition, which includes Benjamin Constant, Stendhal, Roland Barthes, and Milan Kundera, Czech but turned French. Derrida himself wrote somewhere that when one says, "I love you," it's always more or less a quote. To the mimeticians present at this conference, I need not go to great lengths to affirm that René Girard belongs fully to this tradition. The major attractors of human design, wealth and power, are no more than the fixed points of mechanisms of double and actually multiple mediation. Take power. Power and the illusion of power are one and the same, said political thinkers Etienne de la Boétie in the 16th century and Thomas Hobbes in the 17th. Wealth exists only in the spectator's gaze, showed Adam Smith in his theory of moral sentiments, 18th century, in such a way that wealth is no more than the illusion of wealth. Third, it's shorter, and last case study, love and big data. It's a beautiful story, so I'd like to, I owe this beautiful story, true story, to my great friend, late friend, Heinz von Förster, the founding father of the second cybernetics. Heinz von Förster was Jewish, born in Vienna, and he managed to stay not only in Austria, but in Germany during the whole war, and came to the US, went to the US in 1947, where he became, the story is much more complicated than that, of course, the founder of the second cybernetics, as I explained. So Heinz once told me a lovely story that illustrates the radical insufficiency of simulation when it comes to human affairs. Oh yeah, if we had time, I would, Sandy has written a beautiful text, and I've written myself on this movie, which explains so many things that we're discussing here. Ex Machina by Alex Garland, the British narrator. Yeah, it's a fabulous, but no time. So Heinz von Förster, who died in 2002, and the story involves another great Jewish Austrian thinker and psychoanalyst, actually, Viktor Frankl, whose book Man's Search for Meaning was more popular in the US after the war than Freud's psychoanalysis. This is Heinz at the end of his life, and Viktor Frankl. So the true story takes place in Vienna toward the end of 1945, and it concerns a Viennese friend of Heinz, the psychiatrist Viktor Frankl. Frankl had just returned from the Auschwitz-Birkenau camp, having miraculously survived, and he discovered that his wife, his parents, his brother, and other members of his family had all been exterminated, and he decided to resume his practice, which he called logotherapy. Here, then, is the story, so I've reproduced it here. Concentration camps were the setting for many horrific stories. Imagine then the incredulous delight of a couple who returned to Vienna from two different camps to find each other alive. They were together for about 6 months, and then the wife died of an illness she had contracted in the camp. At this, her husband lost heart completely and fell into the deepest despair, from which none of his friends could rouse him, not even with the appeal of thinking she had died earlier and you had not been reunited. Finally, he was convinced to seek the help of Viktor Frankl, known for his ability to help the victims of catastrophe. They met several times, conversed for many hours, and eventually one day Frankl said, quote, "Let's assume God granted me the power to create a woman just like your wife. She would remember all your conversations, she would remember the jokes, she would remember every detail. You could not distinguish this woman from the wife lost. Would you like me to do it?" The man kept silent for a while, then stood up and said, "No, thank you, doctor." They shook hands. The man left and started a new life. When asked by von Förster about this astonishing and simple change, Frankl explained, "You see, Heinz, we see ourselves through the eyes of the other. When she died, he became blind, but when he saw that he was blind, he could see." Such at least is a lesson that von Förster drew from this story in a typical cybernetic fashion. But I think that another lesson can be drawn from it, which extends the first lesson. The thought experiment to which Frankl subjected his patient echoes one of the most famous Greek myths, the myth of Amphitryon. Amphitryon was a famous, important warrior in the Trojan War. In order to seduce Amphitryon's wife, Alcmena, and to pass a night of love with her, Zeus assumes the form of Amphitryon. So this is a reflection from a friend of mine, a great French philosopher, Monique Cantos-Berber. All through the night, Alcmena loves a man whose qualities are in every particular identical to those of her husband. The self-same description would apply equally to both. All the reasons that Alcmena has for loving Amphitryon are equally reasons for loving Zeus, who has the appearance of Amphitryon. For Zeus and Amphitryon can only be distinguished numerically. They are two rather than one. Yet it is Amphitryon that Alcmena loves and not the god who has taken on his form. If one wishes to account for the emotion of love by the propositions that justify it, or by the qualities attributed to the objects of love, what rational explanation can be given for that something which Amphitryon possesses but not Zeus, and which explains that Alcmena love is directed only at the former and not the latter? Well, that's the enigma. But when you love somebody, you do not love a list of characteristics, even if it were sufficiently exhaustive to distinguish the person in question from everyone else. The accumulation of big data permitted by the most sophisticated algorithms of today's AI won't change anything to that. The most perfect simulation still fails to capture something, and it is this something which is the essence of love, that poor word that says everything and explains nothing. I greatly fear that the spontaneous ontology of those who wish to be the makers or recreators of the world knows nothing of the beings who inhabit it, but lists of characteristics. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, Jean-Pierre. That was a magnificent talk. I'm still reeling from how many ramifications you have raised. At this point, I will turn to Andrew McKenna, who will offer a response, and then we will open the floor to questions.
Thank you, Sandy. In that, as Sandy says, there's a lot going on here. And what I know about artificial intelligence is mostly what I've learned from the writings of Jean-Pierre, among other things. And of course, you know, the science pages in Le Monde and New York Times. I read a few books on the mind-brain controversy, which I'll commend to you later on. But obviously, I regard my remarks as, first of all, I had the luxury of reading it in advance, so I can really study and make marginal notes, etc. my response will be an exercise in superficial. The point of the very last point he makes about love is one that we need to return to, and I'm just going to quote him again, saying, "The most perfect simulation still fails to capture something in this something, which is the essence of love, that poor word that says everything and explains nothing." And then a few sentences later, he says, quote, "If ethics is the least bit related to love, its supervenient base, to use the jargon of analytic philosophy, is condemned by this ontology to remain fundamentally incomplete." At the end, the word ethics comes up. And obviously, ethics is the focus of a lot of concern that is expressed at this meeting regarding AI, and particularly the remarks of there and Woody, no, sorry. In any case, the ethical.
Andrew, Andrew, you're coming in and out. Could you speak a little louder directly?
I will.
Yeah, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Sorry. Anyway, I want to share a screen, which I succeeded in doing last time. Double click it. Don't want that. I'll bring up the one I want. Just to, okay, here we are. I have rated Jean-Pierre's slideshows because it was convenient to do so, in order to insert the two slides that I want to make points that are easier to make visible. On the mind-brain controversy, Raymond Tallis, his book, Aping Mankind, Neuromania, Darwinitis, and the Misrepresentation of Humanity, published in 2011, it's a very coherent challenge to the overweening excessive pretensions of neuroscience. And of course, the overlap of neuroscience and artificial intelligence, Jean-Pierre has already made that point. Another book, Ian McGilchrist, quote, "The Master and Its Emissary, the Divided Brain and the Making of the Western World." Briefly and caricaturely, if you will, he's talking about the bicameral mind. The left hemisphere deals with parts, and it is in a sense Cartesian, and the right hemisphere is holistic. It deals with relations within the whole rather than with singular entities, engaging imagination and affect, for example, empathy. So the right brain, the left brain is Cartesian, the right brain is in a sense Pascal, who famously said, "Le cœur a sa raison, que la raison ne connaît point." The heart has its reasons that reason doesn't understand at all. And of course, Pascal famously could reproduce, before he was 10, the entirety of Euclidean geometry on the basis of one theorem. He invented the calculating machine. He also invented a system of public transportation for the city of Paris, which obviously didn't go down well. McGilchrist's article is his argument, in a sense, is that it is the left brain that made the modern world, and the right hemisphere, notably in imaginative literature at its best, performs a critique of. So I really do commend these two, among other possible writings. Pascal also writes about the automaton. L'automate, he talks about the automate, he talks about mechanical, unthinking activities. That is to say, the way the so-called individual is really behaves as a pawn of various social forces, he calls les prestiges illusoires. Prestiges. He also says of in the pensée, Descartes inutile et dangereux. Descartes is useless and dangerous. I think we are debating just about that problem. Obviously, there are questions in the press about the failure of AI to recognize facial recognition of the skin, which is in any way, say, the person speaking to you. There is the activity going on in China, the re-education of Uyghur Muslim population, which is highly dependent on facial recognition generated by artificial intelligence. Reading from two articles in Le Monde, one cites the philosopher, British or American, Martin Gilbert, who thinks that we have to train their learning algorithms on the basis of the views and behaviors of virtuous humans. Okay, that's the philosopher talking. It's amazing how they don't get it. The question is, well, whose virtues, virtue according to whom? That's a sort of idealistic idea. But there's another operation going on, reported in Le Monde, about using artificial intelligence to detect lone wolves, terrorists who are lone wolves, not part of a group, identify and maybe have web pages, etc., and terrorists and spontaneous terrorists. And somehow or other, you would be able to profile them and prevent the terrorist acts. There's a famous movie about that called The Minority Report with Hans von Sydow, in which you have that whole miasma. In any case, so there are all kinds of ethical problems, some of which are covered, a lot of which are covered in the press. And my final remark, quite simply, is this one, because I can't resist it. I mean, it really is amazing. You saw this slide before. You learn nothing from your travels abroad that you have not more quickly, more easily, and less expensively from the collections of any number of good libraries in the United States. So here's my comment, which I typed out, so I can do it briefly. I filed it under, you couldn't make this up, updating Flaubert's Dictionnaire des idées reçues, Dictionary of Received Ideas, an example of la bêtise. We're talking about artificial intelligence, and we're talking about a lot of people who are very intelligent, and who are really, really stupid. Simon actually said that. L'idiot du voyage, the idiot, it's a canny history, it's a very funny history of tourism, which plays on the French expression, l'idiot du village, the village idiot. And frankly, tourists are, there's something fundamentally idiotic about tourism that even Jean-Pierre alluded to. Our friend Simon is such an idiot du voyage, according to his own words. No reading, no photo viewing will get you to the deep space that Cézanne famously explored. No reading, no previewing will give you feel for the painting, or indeed a feel for the sites he explored. If you go to the Carré de Mimetic, you can stand in a certain spot, look at Wow, and look at a photograph of one of his paintings, and you can look at other ones which really don't look like that at all. It reminds me of that remark that Wilde said, Oscar Wilde's, art, the one about imitation. There's a famous anecdote regarding Picasso's portrait of Gertrude Stein. And you think about it, have you ever seen that painting? It's very famous. And somebody said to Picasso, Pablo, she doesn't look like that. He remarked, but she will. In any case, no reading or photo viewing will get you to the deep space that Cézanne famously explored. Nor will it get you to affective space, the spiritual space that is enshrined in Gothic cathedrals. For example, you have to inhabit that space and sit with it and experience precisely the affective intelligence which went into the building of those cathedrals. nor does Simon have any sense of la mémoire affective explored by Proust. Your tourists go to Ilié, they go to Boulevard Haussmann to find the court-like room, which isn't there anymore. And no such tourism, nor any other Proust site will get you there. Simon, he, by his own admission, could have stayed home. He should have stayed home. For all that we can learn from him about properly human experience, which is essentially embodied in a way that machines, as Dumochel and, that's the other name for him, Paul Dumochel and Pablo Bandera have pointed out. And okay, that takes me to the end of my remarks. I want to thank again Jean-Pierre for an absolutely luminous delivery on many issues of AI. And now I'll turn the mic back to Sandy.
Thanks, Andrew. Jean-Pierre, would you like to make a response?
Well, Andrew's remarks were mainly comments rather than questions. So, well, the only thing I could say, but there are, of course, many others, is that it's easy to make fun of, and I'm not reproaching Andrew for doing it, easy to make fun of Herbert Simon and his attitude preferring the model to the real thing. But I took another example, which was Herbert Simon's discipline, economics. An entire, almost, let's say, 80% of contemporary economics is the exploration, consists in exploring the properties of the mathematical model, let's say, a set of mathematical models. So when you see that, you don't want to laugh. It's, you see, I mean, Herbert Simon had the merit of talking about it explicitly. I mean, in a way that sounds like Bouvard et Pécuchet, you're right. But behind that, they are very, very serious. And again, Herbert Simon is officially the founding father of artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence #1, of course, because as I said, that was maybe a bit because I went too fast. Artificial intelligence started before the name was created by Simon and Newell in the work of Warren McCulloch and Walter Pitts, the model of formal neurons. That was in 1943, and Simon 1954. Okay, so it's yeah. Behind this ridicule, there are very serious discussion to have. And after all, you see, if we are in a simulation now, us now in this conference, we're in a simulation. We see images of one another, we don't see, etc. Through a number of is that bad? Well, it's highly questionable. My experience of teaching at Stanford in quotes, for Stanford, I should say, because Stanford campus was closed and the students were everywhere across the world, from California to Shanghai to etc. etc. So I think my experience, well, it was a PhD seminar, few students, 12, let's say. I think it was very productive. So it was a simulation, if you like, of the real thing, but it was the real thing. Maybe different, but to many, on many scores, very, very productive. Okay, so it's no, just a remark. Simon has the merit of, like a caricature. Caricature says the truth by exaggerating the features. Yeah, but behind
Can
that,
I answer that briefly?
Yeah.
Very briefly. Economics, which is notoriously called the dismal science, but has had aspirations to being an exact science using algorithms precisely. And they completely missed the economic crisis meltdown in 2008 because their expectations and their predictions about market behavior was modeled on these algorithms. And when the housing market crashed, all the people at Wall Street, all the brain scientists, rocket scientists, former graduates of Purdue, etc., went into a huddle and said, well, we didn't expect housing prices go down. They hadn't read Malcolm Gladwell. The prices didn't go down. They just stopped going up. I mean, that's absurd, that blind, and they were that stupid, and these are very intelligent. I'm sorry, but I think humor is very necessary to keep on board. Remember, Jean-Pierre is fond of quoting Bergson talking about men as la machine à fabriquer les dieux, the God-making machine. And I come back with Pascal, le plaisant.
Sorry, could you repeat?
Repeat what?
Your sound from time to time disappears, at least to my ears.
Bergson.
Bergson, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the famous definition of the human as a machine à fabriquer des dieux, God-making machine.
Yeah.
And I quote, there has been a lot of talk in this conference about sort of the godlike aspirations of AI. And that always reminds me again of Pascal, whose sense of humor was really very great, who said, le plaisant Dieu que voilà. That's all I'd say.
Okay.
So, do you want to say something, Jean-Pierre, or we turn to
no.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So we turn to a question by Teresa Kenny, who asks the following: does Vico's dictum exclude the children that we make? Are humans always outside of the true for Vico? Are we interested in the copy that is the human being, or is it always uncopyable?
That's a very difficult and very interesting question. Oh la la, yeah. Well, the best answer that I can think of off the cuff of this, without reflecting too much, is the beautiful words that Hannah Arendt devotes to birth in her book, The Human Condition. The creation of the radical new. To give birth is to create something. An entity, let's say, very vague term, that is radically new. So it's the opposite of stimulation, reproduction, etc., etc. It's well, then of course I know there are parents who want their children to repeat what they tried to do without success and to be successful. But that's bad education, of course. No, it's so making children, I think, is completely opposite to Vico's views. What would be very much in line with Vico's views would be one of the objectives of artificial intelligence and its ideological offsprings like transhumanism, to create life and to create a human being from scratch. Yeah. And I have a good friend that I've cited in my precisely. Okay, well, if you remember, one of the three mediators between cybernetics and the theories of complex self-organizing systems, which gave birth to second artificial intelligence, was Henri Atlan. Henri Atlan is Jewish. Yeah. Actually, a very interesting Jew because he's very religious, except that he's a pure atheist. Huh? He doesn't believe in God, but is a perfectly religious. Well, Sandy, you know Henri Atlan.
Oui.
And Henri Atlan has been a member of ethics committees in France and in Israel also. And he has always defended the most advanced, in quotes, biotechnologies, including the radical separation between sexuality and reproduction, for instance, in the form of artificial uterus, etc. And his defense of, his justification of his position has been that God created us in his image, and so we have to create ourselves, beings that are in our image. So creating the golem is part and parcel of our task. This is really Vico, or Jewish maybe. You could talk more about that. So, no, this is a very interesting question. Yeah, giving birth. There are, So, and so I've said enough because I haven't thought enough about it.
So we have another question from Timothy Reynolds, which is, how is Polya's urn related to chaos theory, to chaos science? Is it a matter of order, disorder, or what?
Okay. This is very technical, so I'm afraid we cannot go very, yes, the answer would be yes and no. It's the notion of fixed point, precisely. A fixed point can be a point, but it can be also an attractor, if you like. It can be also an oscillation between two values. For instance, true begets false, false begets true. That's a liar's paradox. But it can be also, there is also, and that's what you're referring to, a third kind of attractors called chaotic attractors. And it's when there is no periodicity. And it's not difficult to generate via the Polya's urn scheme. But one has to, the rule is, of course, the rule of the game is more complicated than just adding one ball of the same color. But you can easily generate chaos also. So point, a value, for instance, oscillation between two values, and chaos. That's one of the categories, the three categories of the general notion of attractor. Yeah, there is a deep relationship.
Thank you. Another question we have from Curtis Grunler. How does the view of all mental operations as fixed point operators compare to Peircean semiotics, the view of mental operations as dependent on triadic sign relations?
No, I would like him to say more about it because it's, I'm afraid I'm not competent there. I'm not competent.
Okay.
I doubt that there is a deep relationship, but I cannot show it off the cuff.
Okay. Eric Wilson writes, with regard to mimesis, suppose at some time in your past you fell in love with someone, authentic, powerful passion, but more on the basis of the way they appeared to be as opposed to the way he or she, quote unquote, really was. In other words, you loved the other on the basis of deductive inference that you made about them, grounded upon their external characteristic and quote unquote signs, beauty, sexual prowess, sophistication. Wouldn't the simulation you created of such a person actually be more satisfying to you than the quote unquote real one who was never really real?
You mean I'm not sure. First, I thought it was about the past. So I misunderstood that, no? What's the role of the past in that? You are in love with someone in the past?
Yeah, he said.
And you realize that that person was not as good as you thought she was?
Yeah, in your past, he says, yes, suppose that sometime in your past you fell in love with someone, authentic, powerful passion, but more on the basis of the way they appeared as opposed to the way.
Yeah, okay, I understand.
Yeah.
But the answer is literary. I mean, or cinematic. I mean, lots of movies, lots of novels. Just to cite one obvious note, Swann's Love. And the last line of Swann's Love is, Elle n'était pas mon genre. She was not my genre. So why was so much in love with her? Yeah.
All right, Bernard, excuse me, pardon.
No,
Yeah.
wait.
Ça va, okay. So Bernadette Waterman Ward writes, it has been proposed that being, l'être, in the Girardian sense, might be considered just a congerie of the desires detected in one's mediator. Is this not like the simulation of a human which Searle critiqued? How do we define being?
Hola, I'm not sure I understood the question. What's the first part?
First part, il était proposé, it has been proposed that being in a sense Girardien
Yes.
might be considered as a congerie of the
Congerie, I don't understand the word congerie.
a gathering together, a collection of the desires.
That's an English word?
Yeah, the congerie, yeah, the conjuries, yeah.
To conjure up an image?
No. The gathering, the collection.
Anama. Ta.
No, but, yeah, it's the word that okay. So
if it's the gathering together of the desires collected in one's model, is this not like the simulation? She's asking about Searle, Jean Searle. Is this not like the simulation of a human which Searle was critical about? That's a human which Searle critiqued. How do we define being in relationship to desires? I guess is what really she's asking.
I'm not sure I understand. I'd like to understand better. In Girard's theory, we know that what we are after is not the object, it's the being we ascribe to the person, the other person. Huh? And we ascribe, and the more the person looks indifferent, the ultimate case being a stone. Huh? A stone, it's what Girard called pseudo-masochism, the transformation of pseudo-narcissism into pseudo-masochism. You get in love with someone who is radically indifferent to you, not because he is, let's say he is, not even because he's self-conceited or he feigns indifference, but because he's really stupid, like a stone. Okay, but I don't see the relationship with Searle here, with Searle's critique of, I suppose, it's a reference to the Chinese room, no?
Yes, right,
critique.
Exactly.
Yeah,
right, yeah.
But okay, you have to. The interrogator will have to explain more what he or she sees in the Chinese room.
Maybe she'll approach you in one of the network rooms, and she can talk with you about that.
Okay.
I'm going to go on to another question. Here's a question by Chris Allen Carter. He writes, if literature is a simulation, does it have a special purpose that's distinguishable from non-literary simulations? We need a definition that covers everything from brief lyrical poems to long novels. Maybe a better question would be, what kind of simulations do we need in most of these days? I guess what he's asking is, what's the nature of the particular simulation of literature? How would we define the literary?
God, you would be in a better place. You're a professor of literature. I'm just a professor of philosophy. Yeah. No, one of my literary heroes, and it's a case, it seems, of many people whose background is in mathematics and logic, which is my case, is Borges, the Argentinian Borges.
Yeah, Borges.
And Borges once defined literature as a game with tacit conventions. But the essence of the game consists in violating those conventions. That's part of the convention. That's a beautiful figure, beautiful pattern. Within the convention, you have contained in it the violation of the convention.
Of the convention, yeah, exactly.
Okay, and Borges was a master at that kind of game. And many other authors, of course, are, when you have, okay, the simplest case is the mise en, André Gide, I forgot to say that in passing. André Gide is the author of the phrase that you use in English, mise en abîme. It's a novel within the novel, etc. Yeah. But what is much more interesting is when the fiction within the fiction is a lie within the fiction. And for me, as some of you know, and you in particular, Sandy, the most beautiful, which actually made me a metaphysician, example of that is Hitchcock's Vertigo.
Yeah.
Where someone falls in love with someone who does not exist. Well, what does that mean, doesn't exist? No character in a movie or a novel exists. But in this particular case, Madeleine, that's her name, she doesn't exist in the story itself because she's a made-up character. Exactly. And that's for me, that's a definition of literature, if you like. And it's a pattern that has been studied by cognitive science. Those who try to work to educate computers, maybe not the computers of today, but and try to have computers, algorithms, let's put it, understand a story, run into this kind of obstacle. They cannot make sense. That's what makes literature, precisely the fact that this kind of literature is not amenable to what computers can do, algorithms can do, is what makes literature, or fiction in general, fiction, so essential to to us.
Jean-Pierre, because we have so many questions here, I'm going to take my authority as the introducer in this session to offer 5 minutes more, if that's okay with you. If you'll stay for 5 minutes.
That's okay with me, but that's a privilege I'm not sure to deserve.
Here's a question from Marianella Blage regarding Professor Dupuy's remarks. Made me think of Magritte's painting, Ceci n'est pas une pipe. Is there a relation? Yeah.
Yeah. The answer is yes, of course. I'm proud because, when I was invited first to Stanford, I had to teach what went by the name of French theory, which maybe is still the case, French theory. Those authors had never read in France. That is Foucault, Lacan, etc. Barthes, etc. And so my first contact with this literature was the concept forged by the Nouveau Roman and the Nouveau Roman, Union novel, etc., of self-reflexive literature.
Right.
And the mise en abîme, that is a novel in the novel in the novel, etc., is the simplest case of that. But there are much more sophisticated cases. And for those more sophisticated cases, I was proud of myself from inventing the phrase self-engulfing artifact. Because you find gulf, which is abyss, abîme, of course, abyss, right. But self-engulfing. So this is not, Ceci n'est pas une pipe, this is not a pipe, is not one of the most sophisticated self-referential. But the mathematical part of my talk, which lasted 5 minutes, about fixed points, you can play on that because, okay, this sentence is false. This sentence is false. The sentence I'm saying, it's called Eubulides paradox. It's much stronger than the so-called Epimenides paradox. Epimenides being a Cretan and said all the Cretans are liars. But this sentence is false. Okay, that's the way you treat it is through an attractor, a fixed point, which is the circle between false and true. The sentence says of itself that it's false, so it is true. But if it is true, what it says of itself is true, then it's false, etc.
Yeah,
so the solution is an attractor, less vicious than a chaos, as someone said before, but nevertheless.
Foucault once said, literature begins with the ancient Greek statement, I am lying.
Yes. Yeah. And it takes, of course, it's in Les Mots et les Choses, and with the Velázquez painting.
Right.
Yes, sure.
So here's a question from Vern Redekop, who writes, let me propose a meta reflection stimulated by what you have said. Girard argues that scapegoating happened thousands of times before the emergence of sacrificial systems and myths. One could frame scapegoating as an instance of emergent, this is Vern's word, emergent creativity to save societies from self-destruction. As this happened, a morphogenetic field, and he says compare Sheldrake, was created that expedited the spread of the phenomenon so it became widespread. Morphogenetic fields function to collectives as mirror neurons function in individuals to expedite mimetic phenomena. Do you have a response to that?
Well, but I didn't exactly follow what you were saying, reporting on that question, because I was stopped from the beginning by the first statement that scapegoating came before the emergence of sacrificial systems, etc. I would say exactly the opposite.
Okay, good.
But and why? Okay, we are between Girardians. Scapegoating means that we know that the victim is innocent. You know that Girard's book, The Scapegoat, couldn't be translated, the title couldn't be translated into Japanese, because in Japan, they have the ritual, and it's described in the Leviticus, but they don't have a word for this spontaneous mechanism that makes a mob surround, etc., etc. So it's according to Girard, but we can all share this view, I suppose. It's thanks to the revelation, the Christian revelation, that scapegoating came to light. Scapegoating once again. If you say Sandy is my scapegoat, that means that I'm saying that you are innocent, but I'm taking you as etc. So scapegoating is posterior to etc. So I was stopped from the start by this this problem.
Okay.
So maybe the rest of the question is important and interesting, but
yeah, there's many questions. One of the things that's amazing about doing this is that there are suddenly now 42 new questions that have but I think we've run to 11:37, so I'm going to say that this is a wonderful session. It has been fantastically stimulating in all sorts of levels, and I want to thank you for participating, and I hope that you'll be able to gain some interaction with people that would be helpful to you in your work,
sure. The best today is email. I'm an old-fashioned guy. For me, email is the main means.
Jean-Pierre, if you go to the chat room, you can revisit all the questions.
I
mean, later on in life, and because some of them are quite complex. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. Yeah. I see. Yes, and I have the names in addition. So, but I have a technical question. Does the chat for a given session remains accessible, or does it disappear?
Robert Elliott, can you answer that question?
Yeah, the chat would be unavailable after the session's conclusion.
That's what I thought.
Unavailable.
My bad.
And is there a way to copy it or something? No?
There's not. Wow.
Yes, right now you can cut and paste, but I put my cursor to the chat, but you can't see it. I'm doing.
Anyway, you can do that for one chat, but
No, the whole stack.
Let me
The
see.
whole catastrophe. Just cut and move it to your, word processing page. Relax with it on the beaches of Normandy.
Robert, what if we press this word file at the bottom of the chat? Would that create this chat as a file? When I've taught classes, I've been able to retain the chat itself.
Okay, I'm trying to copy it, and I think it's going to work. Yes.
Good.
Oh my God! Yes, there are many.
There's
many.
a lot of questions that we have no time to get to, but
No, sure.
It would be interesting for you to.
Yeah, I'm almost done. If you give me 1 minute,
Go.
And I'll copy. I'm highlighting the ensemble, and now I copy. And let's see if it works. Okay. New document. Yeah, it works. Yeah.
Ça va.
Okay.
Très bien. Wow.
Okay. Very good. Bravo, Andrew.
Okay, so if you go to meet Jean-Pierre in one of the rooms, you will be able to hear a response to the chat that he will look at. Thank you again. Let us thank our guest for a wonderful production today.
Thank you very much.
Yeah. You can thank by doing the the reactions and then the clapping. that's one way. So we can all put up our little
tactile enough.
It's not really tactile, but you can hold
Virtual
your hand
applause.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Merci
Thank you
beaucoup.
all.
Bye.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.